Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board. Here on the Next Gen Warrior Show, we are proud to promote the continued leadership and service of veterans after they take off the uniform. We hope that these entrepreneurs, innovators, community servants, and senior military personnel provide you guidance and insight on what their journey has been like after the service, so that you can then conquer your transition out of the military and provide some guidance for our peers after they take off the uniform. Joining me today is David Fivecoat. He was an Army colonel, just retired a couple years ago, is now running his own consulting firm out of Columbus, Georgia. And David, I think if we were to jump into your military service here, it would take us almost the rest of the show to get through the incredible service that you gave to the United States Army and to our country. But thank you so much for being on the program with us today. How are you?
Dan, thanks. Really appreciate you having me and everything that you're doing with this podcast. I've probably listened to a half dozen of your podcasts, and everyone I learned something from. So I appreciate you guys doing that in the Texas Land Office for supporting it.
Absolutely. And so like I said, I think we could spend a considerable amount of time just dissecting, talking about, and pulling out the incredible lessons from your military service. But I will allow you to tell our audience some of the greatest experiences that you had, or maybe times, service, and people that stick out to you over your career.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dan. I did 24 years worth of service in the U.S. Army. I started out as a cadet at West Point. I graduated in 1993 and commissioned as an infantry officer. Served the bulk of my career in the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne Divisions, and had the opportunity to work with a great number of NCOs and officers throughout my service. During my time in the Army, I went to Kosovo, I went to Bosnia, I did 3 trips to Iraq, and a trip to Afghanistan as a battalion commander of the Iron Rakkasans, or 3rd Battalion, 187 Infantry. I culminated my service as the commander of the Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade here at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade runs both Ranger School and Airborne School. Had a phenomenal Command Sergeant Major that I got to work with, Kurt Arnold, who's still here in the community, and a number of great Ranger instructors and Black Hats that were committed to training soldiers and producing the best leaders that the Army could. It's been a phenomenal journey, but in 2017, I decided that I needed to make the transition, and so decided to transition. Started working for another company, doing leadership training, worked for them until March of 2020. And then I decided I wasn't being gritty enough, so I decided to found my own company on the beginning of the pandemic. So my company is just over a year old. We do leadership training and business consulting, and look forward to our discussion today about transition and entrepreneurship and what I've learned. I'm early in the process, so I have some different lessons than some of your guests previously have, because I'm only a year into it, and I'm still making some of those mistakes that they already made and learned from and went on to do great things afterwards.
Well, I think it's an important maybe place to be able to talk about those lessons learned from the stage that you're in. Before we started recording here, we even talked about the difference between mid-career transition out of the military versus early career transition. And so for somebody like me who transitioned after 5 years, enlisted, you joined at the time that you're 18, you get out when you're 23, 24, 25, obviously some very formative years for a young man or a young woman, but there is a difference. Whether that's the transition identity for who Dan was as Sergeant Hamilton or Corporal Hamilton or Lance Corporal Hamilton versus what it was like for, Colonel Fivecoat. And the time that you spent in the military was a much different experience, a much different leader experience, a much different strategic, and all of that is internalized, right? I think all of these leadership lessons, service, and skills that you develop are all internalized. So let's kind of start the conversation there with transition identity and what that looked maybe like for you, since as you said, you are still kind of in the throes of figuring out how to go from that leadership position in the military. And then maybe, if you don't mind, maybe talking about some of your peers that you've seen maybe do it well and that you kind of admire that mid-career transition.
Yeah. So I define the mid-career transition as the folks that have done around 20 years. 20 years was the sort of standard benchmark because of the retirement system. But with the new blended retirement system, 20 years may not be the benchmark going forward. But 20 years is a significant amount of time that anybody spends in one company or one organization. For those of us that served in the military, we tend to develop an identity around our military service because it was such a huge part of our lives. For me, it was very formative. The experiences that I got overseas, the experiences I got at West Point, all helped to shape the identity of what I ended up when I got ready to transition out 24 years later. As we were talking before, what I've seen, and I've done some mentoring of other folks that are getting out, and a couple of challenges present themselves for the mid-careerists that are getting out. The first thing that they have to decide is, what sort of company do I want to work in, or where am I going to fit with what I like to do in the military? There are some companies that are very much like the military. They're big bureaucracies. They love PowerPoint. They have lots of processes. And they're really a pretty good fit for the folks that like processes and PowerPoint and that stuff. There's other folks that are more into the entrepreneurial kind of bent. And hey, I need a little bit more freedom and ability to express creativity. And those businesses are a little bit different. And so first, as folks get ready to transition, they have to do a little bit of introspection and say, okay, what sort of company do I want to land in? And sometimes, and I also coach folks and say, hey, look, you're not going to get it right the first time. There's so many shiny balls out there. You don't know what you really know, and be comfortable with accepting that risk in the same way that you accepted risk in the military, that, hey, I may not get it right, but at least I'll end up in a location that I've sort of like, or an area, so I can learn what I don't like, and I can make a better transition 2 to 3 years down the road.
Can I pause you real quick?
Yeah.
Because you said something that kind of stood out to me. You said, accept risk like you did in the military. And that is something that, for me, when I got out of the service, I didn't realize that was going to be part of the equation, right? It's not, IEDs, it's not VBIDs, it's not rounds going down range, but you start to realize, like I did when I was at the University of Texas, like, oh man, I have assumed total and complete control of my life for maybe the first time in adulthood. And you do have to accept some risk. But I think for you, what you've talked about is that for those who are leaving the military and retired, and to have some sort of financial cushion or pension that they have earned, now is almost the best time for them to begin to take that risk, right? Because they have some of that backstop. They have an incredible amount of leadership and experience to fall back on, so they can start a business similar like yourself, because there is a little bit of support there, at least, to accept that responsibility.
Yeah. First thing, let's talk fear. You and I experienced a lot of different fears in the military. I did 102 parachute jumps. The first one was as scary as the last one, and you had to deal with that fear. But I enjoyed being around paratroopers, and I enjoyed that experience. Plenty of fear downrange. But man, when you talk about fear and you're running your own company and you don't have a client come in the front door for 3 months, you're not earning any money. And so I have huge respect for small business owners and the vetpreneurs that are out there that are standing up their own business and are accepting that risk. And I didn't understand it till I was running my own business. And that's huge. So first off, the risk and accepting the risk. Yes, the pension and the cheap healthcare really sets the mid-career is up to take that risk because you've got an income stream that's coming in the door. You've got about the cheapest healthcare and dental care that you can get anywhere in America, and so that really sets you up. I will say that I couldn't do what I did right now without the experience of working for the other company. I don't know I could have gotten a company off the ground doing leadership and business consulting from scratch without the experience of doing another company. And I know others that you've had on here have talked through that. But you've got to manage that risk. You've got to understand it and be willing to embrace it. And I think the mid-careerist, maybe after the first job that they take out in the world, may decide that taking that risk and standing up that company on their own is really something that they want to do and can take advantage of because they have these advantages that the military gave them. There's also the competitiveness for, if you're a disabled small veteran, you can create that to compete for government contracts. There's a lot of advantages that we have as veterans that should encourage folks to take the entrepreneurial route because of the different cushions that they have.
So I want to go back and hit one more time the identity portion of military transition. And I wanted to ask just for, kind of our understanding, and I think maybe for more junior members of the military, when you got out, did you miss it? Did you say, man, I wish I had the uniform back on. I wish I was downrange, or do you still have those days, even though you are assuming a tremendous amount of risk starting your own business? It's a different risk. But sometimes, I think as veterans, whether you've been in for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, or you've been in for 5, like myself, or 4, are there still days you go, man, I just missed that risk. I miss going down range and being with my buddies and being on the front lines?
So, yeah, I think we all have those days. I certainly do, where I really miss the people. And, it's not, there are days where I don't miss certain things about the Army, like waiting around for the 1700 safety briefing on a Friday, or doing some other things like that weren't the most fun things to do. But I still do, there are habits that were inculcated in me in the military that I still do today. I still get up early in the morning and get my physical fitness in because that's something that's important to me. I make sure that I go see some of the buddies because I'm right here at Fort Benning, either connect to them on the phone or go see them and catch back up with them just to see what they're doing. Let's talk for a second about transition identity. And I think that's one of the things that is certainly the mid-careerists, and it goes all the way down to the junior enlisted and officers as well. I have seen the folks now, and I recognize it more now that I'm out, but the folks that really struggle with reestablishing a new identity post-military. And it's something that I coach anybody that I'm talking to that's getting out of the Army. You need to think about what your new identity is going to be. You've wrapped it around being a paratrooper or a ranger or, an aviator or whatever for X number of years, but that's going to go away. And you can decide that you want to be a great father. You can decide that your next job you're going to go all in on your next job. Or, you can turn to some things that aren't so helpful. Like, you see the guys that are struggling with alcohol or other substances or doing things that are self-destructive. Everybody wrestles with figuring out their new identity. For me, a big bridge that I think is super helpful was physical fitness. When I was in the Army, I love the fact that we got paid to work out for an hour and a half. I was like, hey, I'm a professional athlete. I get paid to work out for an hour. Now I don't get paid to work out, but I still try to work out. And for me, it helped with the transition to continue in athletic endeavors. I started racing in triathlons. I've done bike races. I take my daughter snow skiing in the winter. And for me, in the post-Army life, a way that I have sort of reestablished a new identity for myself is through athletics. I think it's a great thing. There are those folks that you see, though, that get out of the Army that say, hey, I'm never working out again.
Yeah.
And I am going to drink and eat as much as I want. And they put on a ton of weight. And you're like, man.
Yeah, it's a different lifestyle, huh?
Right. It is definitely a different lifestyle. And so just, the thing that I'd like to leave folks with that are still in the military, that are contemplating making that transition, is take a little bit of time, talk to your spouse, your significant other, your friends. Hey, I'm going to go through a big transition and I have to think through what my new identity is and what do I want to do with that? And hey, this is what I'm thinking. I'm going to try to focus my effort into, but switching it, turning it off and then not having that discussion or that thought doesn't set you up, I think, for success as you make that transition. And so I think that's one of the things that folks need to consider as they're getting ready to get out.
Yeah. One thing that took me a while, and I've heard from a lot of veterans on this program, is when they leave the service, they go from a constant state of leadership, whether they're an E4 or an E5 or E6 or 05, 06. There is a constant demand from the leadership above them that they lead and they take care of the troops, the Marines, the soldiers in their command. And that often means, even for myself, that I was responsible for 10, 15, 16 lives downrange, that I was responsible for multi-million dollars worth of MRAPs when we would leave the wire. And it meant even the personal care of the individuals, of managing personalities. And, while sometimes maybe we look back and wish we would have performed a little bit different or handled situations differently, the thing that was ingrained in me is that I was a leader. And so I had to take responsibility for the successes and the failures of my own leadership when I was in the military. But when I left the Marine Corps, all of a sudden I had to become a follower. And there was and I still am a follower. I've been out of the service for 10 years, but I still find myself learning how to be a follower as opposed to being an E4 and E5 and telling people what to do and trying to get things done on a daily basis. You wrote an incredible blog post, and I want to allow our audience some time to go and find us it's at the fivecoatconsultinggroup.com, and the blog is in the top right. And you have done an incredible job blogging over 120 blog posts. You can follow David on LinkedIn and on social media to catch his updated writing. But this one, number 121, is what is followership? And it resonated with me because the great qualities of a follower are, we described here, are competence, work ethic, judgment, initiative, loyalty, and ego management. Now, as a riled up, testosterone-filled 24, 25-year-old young man who had just gotten back from a couple deployments overseas, I might have had a little problem with ego management, trying to figure out how to become a follower on campus, trying to figure out how to interact with my professors, trying to figure out that I didn't have everything figured out after I had so many life-changing and integral moments as such that were so important to me at a young age. But learning how to be a follower was incredibly important for somebody who had trained for leadership. Can you talk about that juxtaposition?
Yeah. The paradox of being a good follower and a good leader, kind of two sides of the coin. You can't have a great team. The military always talks about these great teams, and then we always talk about leadership, but we never talk about the fact that you need to have a bunch of good followers in order to make that team. You're right. That's one of the transition challenges, because the military preaches leadership so much. It's inculcated in us. We're always supposed to be leaders. Even when we're followers, we're supposed to be leaders. But really, the great leaders, you think about all the way up to the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. At some point in time, even the chairman, despite being overall, he has to be a good follower at some point in time, because the president is going to give a directive. He's got to, sometimes some of the other members of the joint staff are taking a lead, and he has to accept to be in a follower role. So this idea of being a good follower, I saw it a lot at Ranger School. The Ranger School, one of the real strong points of Ranger School is this idea of the peer evaluation, where at the end of each of the phases of Ranger School, your peers rank order everybody in the squad from 1 to 15. If everybody rank orders you 15th, you're deemed not a good follower. And basically it's because you didn't contribute to the team when you weren't in the leadership position. It was a great experience talking to those folks that came up short on the followership. My sergeant major and I probably did negative counseling of over 1,000 Ranger students who were leaving the course for various reasons. And we always tried to talk them through, okay, first they had to accept what they didn't do well at, and then we helped them try to build a plan to get better at it. And some of these folks that struggled with the followership, it was, hey, we've got to work on the ego management. We've got to work on the judgment, and we've got to work on the work ethic, that they have to see that it's value added to the team to be that person that volunteers to carry the machine gun or carry the extra water or whatever it is. Those things helps to make that transition from leader to follower that happens every day in Ranger School, and then happens every day out here in the real world. I appreciate you talking about the blog. The blog is, despite trying to be a thought leader with the blog, in some ways it's a followership role as well, because if the market doesn't like what I'm writing, I can write as much as I want about things that are important. But if the market doesn't like what I'm writing about and doesn't find value added in it and doesn't come visit the website or doesn't ask me to see if I can help their company, I'm just out there, writing on the internet, and nobody's reading it. And so I try to find things that resonate with folks, try to help folks get better based off of military experience and now my corporate experience, and try to get better. And one of the things that really resonated was that followership article, and I appreciate you highlighting it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit before we get to the consulting group and before we get to entrepreneurship and the services that you're providing. I do want to kind of park on the blog aspect real quick and ask you what you have learned from writing, ask you, do you enjoy writing, and kind of what your process is when you come up with daily or weekly posts.
Yeah, no, great question. I will say that I never expected to be a blogger at age 49. I started writing last March, and really the impetus was I picked my daughter up from school. She never went back to in-person school that year. And the coronavirus crisis felt like a lot of what we had experienced overseas. And I was like, hey, maybe I can help some folks by blogging about leadership topics and leading in crisis that might resonate with folks and help them get through the coronavirus crisis. So I started blogging, like you said, 120 blog posts later. If you look way back at my early blog posts, they're a lot shorter than what I write now. But I have a 5-week process that I do for blog posts. Typically I work 5 weeks ahead, is when, so like right now I'm out in June writing. I blog on both Mondays and Thursdays. Okay. On various topics. And so I write an initial draft of the 5 weeks out blog post this week. And so sometimes it's super rough, and there's just a couple of semi-lucid paragraphs there. Other times it comes out fully formed. But what I do is 2 weeks out, I re-edit them and they really polish them up. And then a week out, I edit it again, and then publish Mondays and Thursdays at 6 a.m. on the website and LinkedIn, and then they go out in an email at 7 a.m. to anybody that subscribes to it. It is interesting to see which blog posts resonate and have gotten traction out there. The most popular one was one on the operations order that I wrote early on. It's like blog post 29 or 30. That still gets 4 or 5 views a week, which which is big for me. I'm not, I'm not Seth Rogen or one of those guys, but get a couple thousand views on the website a month, and I'm happy that the blog posts have been able to help some folks, and folks find them useful. Sometimes I get great ideas for blog posts by just talking to folks like you or other folks in the corporate space. We'll say, hey, yeah, I've got this problem, and I'll think about it and write something on it. One of the ones I wrote last week was a friend, Ralph Puckett, who's a legend in the Ranger community, just got selected for the Medal of Honor. That one was sort of a short notice one because I found out through the grapevine that was going to finally be announced. And so wrote that sort of over a weekend. But Ralph is and was a great mentor to me. He came out to every single Ranger PT test while I was in command. He would talk to the Ranger students, and then he would walk. The Ranger students do a 5-mile run. He would walk a mile out and then walk a mile back. We actually had to put a Ranger instructor to walk with Ralph to make sure that the Ranger students didn't knock him over because it's dark. He did wear he had his reflective belt on, but we didn't want Ralph hurt by a overeager Ranger student. So, but he's a phenomenal guy, and when you talk about giving back to the community, his second act, where for the last 25 years he has mentored folks in the 75th Ranger Regiment, the Ranger Training Brigade. He also mentored OCS students here as well. The guy just has shared so much and so much wisdom and helped and developed so many leaders. It's amazing what he did in really what was his third act. If you think about his military career, and then he ran Outward Bound for about 20 years, and then he came back here to the Columbus community because his wife was from Columbus, Jeannie, and then gave back to Fort Benning. And so what a legend, and super proud that I've known Ralph for the last half dozen years, and excited to see what happens here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it's such a really incredible story, and I'm glad you highlighted that one as well. I do want to ask you about entrepreneurship. You recently started, as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, the Fivecoat Consulting Group. You're also, I don't know if I mentioned, the author of Grow Your Grit, Overcome Obstacles, Thrive, and Accomplish Your Goals. So let's talk about entrepreneurship first. Let's talk about consulting. I know you are somebody who loves to manage leaders, who loves to provide wisdom and guidance, and talk to us a little bit about your desire to start a business, and then some of the services that you've been providing over the last year.
Yeah. So the company started in March of 2020, and we really do a couple of main things. First off, we do executive coaching, which I found incredibly rewarding to work with executives and try to help them get better. Try to set up a rhythm of meeting with them every other week and helping them get better and improve. Also do leadership talks and work with corporate groups on a little bit larger scale. One of the things that the blog post led into was this book called Grow Your Grit. That happened back late last year when a client said, hey, take a look at this stuff on grit. And I had read Angela Duckworth's book. This was another person's book. I looked at it, and both of them I felt fell a little bit short on telling you how to develop your grit. They're great on telling you what it is, how to measure it, who has it, how they're successful, but it didn't really have a process to help you get better. And so I started writing it. I actually rolled out a lot of the ideas in a blog post that propelled me for about 3 months worth of blog posts as I wrote. And I would take feedback. Folks would comment it on LinkedIn, and I would go, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. And I would go back in and change it. And so the book comes out on July 12th. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. I also have learned a lot about self-publishing. I'm going to have a couple blog posts coming out here real soon on the lessons that I learned out of self-publishing. It is, once again, when you do something, you gain a huge amount of respect for authors. I'm a huge reader. I've read a ton since kindergarten. And you're critical of authors. Some of them are really good, some of them are really bad. And now, having gone through the experience of trying to write a book, I just got it back from the editor for a second time. I have to go through and fix the stuff that she said needs some help. And then we go into interior design, indexing, and all the other things that go into building a great book. So it was a lot more than I thought it was going to be when I got into it, as most things are. So I've got that book coming out. I've been speaking on how do you grow your grit for both organizations and people. And that's one of the things that the company offers. The last thing that the company has done is based on the exposure that I got from the blog. Different companies have reached out for business consulting help. One company, I helped them with improving their veteran hiring and retention and environment. And that was a very rewarding experience, working with them, working with the veterans in the community in their company, and trying to help the experience of how they were onboarding, bringing those vets in, how they were mentoring and leading those vets in that company. Right now, working with another company on how to improve their onboarding. We all have shown up to units in the middle of the night and not had the greatest onboarding experience, or everybody's really excited that you're showing up because that means they get to leave, or stuff like that. And so looking forward to helping them over the next 2 months on onboarding.
Yeah, and let me ask you what it's been like. I mean, just to start a new business in the middle of a pandemic, one must have been a little difficult. I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons about entrepreneurship, but two, and I'm interested to know, you've probably learned a lot about business and what business needs. And you did talk a little bit about veteran onboarding, and you talked about building veterans culture. And kind of interested to dig into that with you, because I do think that veteran hiring has become I think such a great cause for a lot of businesses, and it does seem like there is such a demand for veteran talent within the community, whether it's there in Georgia or Texas or across the nation. Interested to hear what maybe your experience was with that, and kind of the insight that you have regarding veterans hiring, or maybe what veterans need to hear in order to get hired might be a good place to start.
Yeah. So lots of things we can talk about there. So one of the things that I think it's a two-sided street. There's lots of organizations out there helping veterans make the transition. There's lots of organizations that are trying to help veterans make that transition. There's not as many helping the companies try to improve their hiring and environment. And I think the first thing the company has to do is look at what kind of veteran will fit best in our organization. And there are different types of veterans. The enlisted soldier like yourself who got out at 5 years is probably a better fit in some companies. Or when you come out of college, like you did, you're a better fit for certain type of companies. I think the hardest group to fit is this mid-career veterans, because they've got 20 years of leadership experience and led large organizations, and yet most companies don't want to take the risk on them because they don't have any experience in the field. They don't have any experience in their line of business. And it's a huge, when you talk about a company, it's a couple $100,000 risk to recruit, hire, onboard that person, train them, and be willing, because they're going to be a novice at, whatever it is, from banking to healthcare to wherever, even though they come in with this leadership experience. And so there's some humility on the veteran side, some willingness to take a step back. I think the veterans need to make sure, though, as they move into the company, that they ask about what's the path forward.
Yeah.
And that has to be a question in the interview process. Hey, can you talk to me about the path forward that you see me taking if I'm a high performer? Can you also show me?
Those are really,
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that's maybe not something that I've never thought about, asking that in an interview. And I think veterans would be wise to heed that. So sorry to interrupt.
No. In the interesting thing, I don't know if you guys had this in the Marine Corps, but in the Army, they used to show a PowerPoint slide of what the 20-year career of an infantry officer would look like. And, hey, you're going to be, platoon leader here, go to school, whatever. Most corporate groups don't lay out the roadmap in the company that well. And that's one of the kind of things that before you get hired, you need to have that discussion of, hey, what that roadmap kind of looks like, because some companies it's opaque, and it's not a clear kind of thing. Or when they hired them, they were thinking that it's a 6-year path to get them back to a leadership role. And some veterans, at 40, aren't willing to take a 6-year path to get back to leading 5 to 10 people. And so there's some questions like that have to happen during the interview process. I think it is helpful for companies to think about it. And for instance, some companies may be better off hiring, the JMOs, the junior military officers that are getting out after 5 years. That might be a better cultural fit to come into your company and provide that veteran experience, but also fits in and can make the transition where perhaps the 20-year veteran who got institutionalized a little bit too much in the military machine may not be as good a fit. So I think there's a two-way street. Companies have to think about it. The veteran has to think about it and ask some of those hard questions during the interview process before they get hired, because after they get hired, they can figure out pretty quickly that they're not in the right environment, and it becomes a frustrating experience for them.
Yeah. Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today, and I appreciate you being with us. I want to provide your website one more time, because the writing that you do and the book that you have coming out, I think will be really beneficial to our audience. It's the fivecoatconsultinggroup.com. Again, the blog is right at the top there. And then the upcoming book will be, let me make sure I got this right. Grow Your Grit, Overcome Obstacles, Thrive, and Accomplish Your Goals. David, great to have you on the program today. I wanted to offer you the last word before we close it out.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me, Dan. And any veteran that's listening to this podcast that's thinking about transitioning or getting out, whether you're a mid-career junior military officer or enlisted soldier, would love to help you and provide some and talk to you. You can get a hold of me through the website, like Dan talked about. I'm a resource for you. Anything I can do to help your audience and your veterans as they make the transition, and love to try to lend a hand.
Well, Colonel, I appreciate you being on the program today, talking to us about your extensive and very honorable military service, as well as entrepreneurship and veterans hiring and what the transition experience is like. It's been a great conversation. It's been enlightening, and we hope to have you back on the program soon. Thank you so much for being with us.
No, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This has been the Next Gen Warrior Show. Thank you so much for being with us today. We encourage you to share the program with your friends. You can find us on social media by typing in Voices of Vets on Instagram @Voices of Vets and on your favorite podcasting platforms. Until next week, we'll talk to you soon. Keep serving, keep leading in your communities. We'll talk to you soon.
Follow us on Instagram @Voices of Vets, on Twitter @Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior Podcast.